My name is Marcus Vale, and I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I did not walk into Northgate Galleria that night because I loved Christmas. I walked in because my daughter Lila had asked me 3 weeks earlier if I could find her a particular snow globe, the kind with the little ceramic fox curled inside, the one her mother used to keep on the windowsill before the divorce. Cassandra had thrown it out during the move. Lila had cried for 2 days. So at 10:47 p.m. on December 20th, I parked in the east garage, took the escalator to the second level, and started walking past the Santa display toward the gift kiosk, where I'd seen one in the window the previous weekend. The mall was louder than I expected. Last-minute shoppers always have a particular sound. The laughter sharper, the footsteps quicker, the children whining at a pitch that cuts through the speakers playing Bing Crosby for the 400th time. I remember a woman arguing with her teenage son about a phone case. I remember a security guard, mid-50s, gray mustache, leaning against the railing outside the Apple store and watching the crowd the way a lifeguard watches a calm pool. His name tag said Raymond. I would learn the rest of his name later, when there was time to learn things like that, and when there was no longer time to use them. I had the snow globe in my hand at 11:51 p.m. I'd paid in cash because my card had been giving me trouble. The cashier was a young woman, maybe 22, with a candy cane pin on her lanyard. She told me her name was Priscilla and that the fox was her favorite design too. She wrapped it in tissue paper with the kind of care people only give when they're working a job they secretly like. I tipped her $5 and turned toward the escalator. That's when the first scream came from the food court. I want to be honest about what I did in those first seconds, because the version of me that existed before midnight on December 20th was not a man who ran toward screams. He was a man who paid his mortgage, who'd been divorced for 2 years, who taught high school history and coached freshman soccer badly. He froze. He stood at the top of the escalator with a ceramic fox in a paper bag and waited for someone else to do something. What I saw instead was the security guard Raymond moving toward the noise at a fast walk, one hand on his radio, the other on a flashlight he was unclipping from his belt. He was not panicked. He had the body language of a man who had seen drunks and shoplifters and medical emergencies and assumed this would be one of those. I watched him disappear around the corner past the Cinnabon. I waited 8 seconds. I counted them later, because I've counted everything since. Then the lockdown siren started. The mall has a sound system most people never hear deployed, a deep, 2-tone industrial alarm that cuts through every speaker and overrides the music. It is the sound, I would later learn, of the steel emergency shutters descending at every external exit. I felt the building change. The Bing Crosby died mid-syllable. The lights shifted from warm gold to a sharper white as the emergency system took over. And underneath all of it, beneath the alarm and the confused shouting and the sudden running, I heard the grinding metal of the shutters sealing us in. A woman behind me said very quietly, "Oh God, they're locking us down." I turned. She was holding the hand of a boy, maybe 7, who was staring up at her with the patient confusion of a child who has not yet decided whether to be afraid. The woman's eyes met mine. She was looking for an adult. She was looking for someone who knew what to do. I'm ashamed to tell you what I did next, because I nodded at her as if I did. Her name was Devi Kapoor, and the boy was her nephew, Arav. I learned this in the next 90 seconds because she started talking the way some people talk when they're scared fast, organized, almost like she was filing a report. She was a pediatric nurse at St. Brendan's. Her sister had dropped Arav off at the mall while she finished a late shift. The plan was for Devi to take him home after the food court closed. The plan had not survived contact with whatever was now happening on the first floor. We were standing near the railing on the second level. Below us, The food court was emptying in the wrong way. People weren't walking toward the exits. They were running back from them, toward the center of the mall, toward us. I saw a man in a Carhartt jacket, carrying a small girl over his shoulder. I saw an elderly couple holding hands and moving with the slow desperation of people who knew they could not move faster. I saw the Cinnabon employee, a kid in a green visor, vault the counter and sprint past his own register without looking back. And then I saw the first one. He was wearing a Northgate security uniform, not Raymond. Younger, maybe 25, with the kind of close-cropped haircut that suggested recent military. His face was wrong. The angle of his jaw, the way it hung loose, the way his eyes tracked nothing and everything at once. There was blood on his shirt that did not appear to be his. He came around the corner past the smoothie stand at a strange, lurching half-run. Not the choreographed shamble of every zombie movie I'd ever seen, but something more, like a drunk man who has forgotten how legs work and is making up for it with speed. He hit a woman in a red coat from behind. She went down. He went down on top of her. I will not describe what happened next. I will tell you that Debbie grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises I would find 3 days later, and that Araf made a small, high sound that was not quite a word, and that I turned us all away from the railing and started moving. "Where?" Debbie said. "Where do we go?" I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know. But I had walked this mall every Saturday for 6 years, when Lila was small and Cassandra still spoke to me. And somewhere in the part of my brain that handles muscle memory rather than thought, I remembered that the second-floor service corridor behind the Macy's wing led to a maintenance stairwell, and that the stairwell connected to a back-of-house storage area where the seasonal decorations were kept. It was not a plan, it was a direction. "This way," I said. We were not alone in moving. A small current of people was flowing the same way, the ones who'd been on the second level when the screaming started, and who'd had the same instinct to get away from the railings, away from the open central atrium. I counted, without meaning to. There were maybe 30 of us heading toward the Macy's corridor. Behind us, the sound of the food court was changing, becoming less like screaming and more like something I did not have a word for. A man caught up to us at the entrance to the corridor. Tall, broad, wearing a North Face jacket and an expression I recognized from coaching, the expression of someone who has just decided to take charge of a situation, whether or not he is qualified. He was maybe 45. He had a wedding ring. He had a Bluetooth earpiece in one ear that was still blinking blue, as if he'd been on a call when the world ended. "You know where you're going?" he said to me. "Service corridor," I said. "Stairwell, back storage." He nodded once, the way a man nods when he's deciding to trust you provisionally. "I'm Garrett. Garrett Hale. I was a captain in the Guard 10 years ago. I'm going to help." I did not yet know that Garrett Hale was going to be the reason 11 people died. The service corridor was narrower than I remembered and brighter than I expected, fluorescent tubes running the length of the ceiling, the walls painted that institutional beige that exists only in places customers aren't supposed to see. The door to the corridor was a fire door, heavy steel with a push bar. Garrett held it open while the rest of us funneled through. I counted again. 31 people. A child in a stroller. 2 teenagers in matching Letterman jackets who looked like brothers. An old man with an oxygen tank on a small wheeled cart. Priscilla from the gift kiosk, still wearing her candy cane pin, her face white in a way that made the pin look obscene. Garrett let the door close behind us. The push bar clicked. The sound on the other side became muffled, then almost peaceful, the way a closed window makes a thunderstorm feel like weather happening to someone else. "Okay," Garrett said. He had a voice built for command, not loud but pitched to carry. "Listen up. I need everyone to stay together. Don't break off. Don't run ahead. We're going to find a defensible position, and we're going to wait for the authorities to clear this." I should have said something then. I should have said that I'd seen what happened to the woman in the red coat, and that the thing wearing the security uniform had not been a person anymore, and that no authority I could think of was going to clear anything in the next several hours. I didn't. I let Garrett talk because Garrett was talking, and because the part of me that had nodded at Debbie was still nodding at anyone who seemed to know what to do. We moved down the corridor. The maintenance stairwell was where I remembered, behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel" with a keypad that had been propped open with a folded piece of cardboard, probably by a smoker on break. Small mercies. Garrett led us down. The stairwell smelled like old cigarettes and floor wax. Arav's footsteps were small and quick beside Debbie's. The old man with the oxygen tank was breathing in a way I did not like. At the bottom of the stairwell, a second door opened onto the back of house storage area. It was bigger than I'd expected. A long concrete room with rolling racks of seasonal inventory, pallets of cardboard boxes, a forklift parked in one corner. There were two other doors. One led, according to the faded sign, to Loading Dock A. The other was unmarked, and there were already people inside. A cluster of maybe 40 mall employees and shoppers had found the storage area before us, channeled in from a different stairwell on the opposite side of the building. A woman in a Macy's vest was crying quietly against a stack of boxes. A man in a Cinnabon apron, not the kid I'd seen vault the counter. An older one, maybe the manager, was sitting on the floor with his back against the forklift, staring at nothing. And in the center of the room, on top of an overturned crate, a woman was standing and talking, calmly, clearly, with a clipboard. She was perhaps 50, short gray hair, no makeup, wearing a Northgate Galleria management blazer over a white blouse. She had the unmistakable posture of a person who had been running this building for a long time and was not going to stop just because something had gone wrong inside it. "And I need everyone who can lift more than 50 pounds to identify themselves," she was saying. "We need to move inventory to block the loading dock door. Lola, can you get the first aid station from the security office? Marco, I need you to do a count." She saw us come in. She did not stop talking. She simply absorbed our arrival into her ongoing plan, gestured for us to gather, and said, "I'm Eleanor Pike. I'm the operations director for this property. And if you're here, you are now part of how we get through tonight. I need names, ages, and any medical conditions. Start with the children." Garrett Hale, beside me, said quietly, "Who put her in charge?" I looked at him. I had known Garrett Hale for less than 10 minutes, and I already understood that the question was not rhetorical. He was assessing. He was looking at Eleanor Pike the way a man looks at a chair he's deciding whether to sit in or move. "She works here," I said. "She manages a mall," Garrett said. It was not a sneer. It was something worse, a calm, almost gentle correction. The kind of thing a man says when he's already decided what comes next and is being patient about it. "I've run logistics for 200 people in conditions worse than this. She's going to get someone killed." I did not respond. I told myself it was because I didn't know enough yet to take a side. That was not the real reason. The real reason was that Garrett Hale was the kind of man whose certainty made you want to borrow some. And I was a high school history teacher who had nodded at a stranger in a hallway because she'd looked at me like I knew what I was doing. Eleanor's count came back at 187. Then the door from the second stairwell opened, and another small group came through, bloodied, breathing hard, one of them bitten on the forearm and not yet saying so. The count went to 198. Then two more limped in from a side passage I hadn't noticed. And Eleanor wrote down 200 on her clipboard and underlined it twice, as if the number itself were a thing she could hold on to. 200 strangers, One concrete storage room. 3 doors. The sound of the mall above us was muffled, but not absent a kind of distant, irregular thudding, like something heavy being dropped at unpredictable intervals. Eleanor organized us into groups. She did it fast, without ceremony. Group A, medical. Anyone with training, led by Devi when Devi raised her hand. Group B, physical. The lifters and movers, 22 of us, which is how I ended up next to Garrett Hale stacking pallets against the loading dock door. Group C, caretakers. The people watching the children and the elderly, and the man with the oxygen tank, Wissem, whose name was Mr. Halberstam, and who was, Devi quietly told me, not going to last the night without his medication. Group D, scouts. 4 people Eleanor sent with flashlights to map the back of house and identify every door, every vent, every possible breach point. It was, I have to tell you, extraordinary work. Eleanor Pike had been running this building for 16 years. She knew where the water shutoffs were. She knew which doors had functioning locks and which had been broken for months, because corporate wouldn't approve the repair budget. She knew that the loading dock door had a manual override that could be bypassed from outside if someone knew where to look. And she had Marco, her assistant manager, mid-30s, quietly efficient, welding it shut with a portable kit from the maintenance closet within 20 minutes of our arrival. Garrett watched all of this while we worked. He did not contradict her. He did not undermine her. He simply watched, and occasionally murmured things to the men working beside him. And slowly, so slowly, I did not notice it happening until much later, a small group began to coalesce around him. 3 of the lifters from Group B, one of the scouts, who reported to Garrett before reporting to Eleanor. A man named Devereaux, who'd been a cop in another city 20 years ago, and who introduced himself to Garrett by his rank. By 1:30 a.m., we had a sealed room, a rough inventory, a triage corner where Devi was treating the bitten man. His name was Hollis. He was 41. He was a software engineer who'd come to the mall to buy his wife a necklace in a fragile, miraculous order. By 1:45 a.m., Hollis started to convulse. By 1:47 a.m., Garrett Hale walked over to where Devi was kneeling beside him, looked down at the man for perhaps 4 seconds, and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "We need to talk about what we're going to do with him before he turns." The room went quiet in a way I had not heard a room go quiet before. It was not the silence of attention. It was the silence of 200 people simultaneously realizing that the question they had been trying not to ask had just been asked for them, and that someone was now going to have to answer. Devi stood up slowly. She had Hollis's blood on the cuffs of her sweater. She had the expression of a woman who had spent her career keeping children alive in pediatric oncology and who had a very specific tolerance for men in jackets making pronouncements about other people's lives. "He's not turning," she said. "He's seizing. It's shock. His pulse is 130 and his pupils are responsive. He has hours, possibly more. We don't know the progression. We don't know if everyone bitten turns. We don't know anything yet." "He was bitten on the forearm 40 minutes ago," Garrett said. His voice was still calm. "His wife is not here. His children are not here. I am asking this room to think clearly about what happens if he convulses again in 2 hours and comes up off that floor as one of them. We have a child in a stroller 15 feet away. We have Mr. Halberstam on an oxygen tank. We have a sealed room with one functional exit. I am not proposing cruelty. I am proposing arithmetic. I want you to understand that Garrett Hale was not wrong about the arithmetic. I want you to understand also that he was wrong about almost everything else, and that the distinction is the entire reason I'm telling you this story." Eleanor stepped down off her crate. She walked over to where Devi was standing, and she looked at Hollis on the floor for a long moment. Then she looked at Garrett. "We don't kill people in my building," she said. "It isn't your building tonight," Garrett said. Gently, almost kindly. "It's our building." The room did not erupt. That isn't how it happened. People do not, in my experience, erupt in moments like that. What they do is shift. Posture changes. Eye contact lengthens or breaks. Small alliances form in the space of a glance. I watched, from where I was standing beside a pallet of wrapping paper, as the room sorted itself into two groups without anyone having to say a word. Devi's group, around the wounded. Garrett's group, around the door. A vast, uncertain middle, watching to see which side was going to be the side that lived. I was in the middle. I'm ashamed of that too. Eleanor said, "We're going to vote." Garrett said, "On a man's life?" "On a policy," Eleanor said. "On what we do when someone is bitten. Because there will be others. There are already others coming up the corridor. We need to decide as a group what we are, before we have to be it." It was the right call. I knew it was the right call. Eleanor was doing what every functional institution does in a crisis. She was converting an impossible individual decision into a procedural one, distributing the moral weight across 200 shoulders so no single person had to carry it alone. It was, I realize now, the most experienced thing anyone said all night. It was also the moment Garrett Hale had been waiting for. Because Garrett Hale understood something Eleanor did not, or had perhaps forgotten in 16 years of running a building where the worst thing that ever happened was a shoplifter or a fire drill. Garrett understood that votes in frightened rooms do not measure what is right. They measure what is loudest. And he had spent the last hour speaking quietly and steadily to the right people, the lifters and the scouts, and the ex-cop, and the men whose hands were still shaking, and who wanted, more than anything in the world, to be told by another man that they were going to be okay. The vote went 118 to 82. Hollis was not going to survive the next hour. I voted with Eleanor. I want that on the record. Not because it makes me brave, it does not, but because the vote was a private one, conducted by raised hand in a room of 200 people. And I've spent the months since wondering whether I would have voted the same way if Garrett had been looking directly at me. I think I would have. I'm not sure. The not being sure is part of what I'm still living with. After the count, Eleanor stood very still for perhaps 10 seconds. Then she did something I did not expect. She nodded, once, the way a person nods who has lost something and is deciding, in real time, what to do with the loss. "Then we do it humanely," she said. "And we do it now, before he wakes up. And we do it together, so that no one person has to carry this alone." Garrett looked, for a flicker of a moment, surprised. He had expected resistance. He had expected a confrontation that would let him consolidate further. Instead, Eleanor had taken his victory and made herself the manager of it, and in doing so had reclaimed something he had been trying to take from her. I watched him recalibrate. I watched him understand that Eleanor Pike was going to be harder to remove than he'd estimated. Devi refused to participate. She said it once, quietly, and went and sat with Araf against the far wall, and put her hands over the boy's ears. Marco, the assistant manager, did what needed to be done with a tarp and a length of cable from the maintenance closet, and the room went very quiet for a long time afterward. I will not describe it further. There are things I owe Hollis's memory, and silence is one of them. When it was over, Eleanor stood back up on the crate. "From this point forward," she said, "anyone who is bitten is moved to a separate quarantine space. We watch them, we treat them. We do not act until there is evidence we have to. We do not vote on individual lives again. We agree now, as a group, what the protocol is, and we follow it. Does anyone object?" Nobody objected. Garrett did not object, because Garrett had already won the thing he'd needed to win, which was not Hollis's death, but the precedent that the room could be moved. Then Eleanor said the second thing, and it was the thing that mattered. "And nobody," she said, "leads this room alone. Not me, not anyone. We are going to form a council of 5, elected now, and every decision of consequence goes through that council, because I have watched, in the last hour, how quickly one voice becomes the only voice. And I will not be that voice, and I will not let anyone else be it either." It was, in retrospect, a masterclass. Eleanor was 60 years old and had spent her career managing the egos of corporate regional managers and union electricians and entitled customers. And she understood, with a clarity I did not yet possess, exactly what Garrett Hale was and exactly how to contain him without humiliating him into something worse. The council was elected within 20 minutes. Eleanor. Garrett, she nominated him herself, which I now believe was a deliberate act of containment. Devi for medical. A woman named Tomoko Reyes, who turned out to be a structural engineer and who had been quietly mapping the load-bearing walls of the storage room since she'd arrived. And, to my genuine astonishment, me. I tried to refuse. Eleanor would not let me. She had watched me come into the room, she said, with 31 people behind me, and she had watched me defer to Garrett without disappearing under him. And she needed a 5th voice that was not committed to either of the 2 poles already forming. She needed, she said, a person who was uncertain. I did not feel honored. I felt afraid. I felt the specific fear of a man who has been handed a weight he is not sure he can carry, by a woman who is no longer offering him the option of putting it down. The first council meeting happened at 2:34 a.m. in the small office off the storage room that Marco used for inventory paperwork. The 5 of us sat around a folding table under a single fluorescent panel. And Eleanor laid out what we knew and what we did not. What we knew. We were sealed inside Northgate Galleria, with 200 survivors. The mall's external shutters were down and could not be raised without power to the central security panel, which had failed when the building went into lockdown. The infected were inside the mall, we did not know how many, but the sounds from above suggested dozens at least. We had food enough, Marco estimated, for 2 weeks if rationed, longer if we accessed the grocery anchor store on the east side. We had water, the building's tanks were full and gravity-fed for the first day or 2. We had medical supplies, thanks to Debbie's group raiding the pharmacy kiosk on the first floor through a side passage Eleanor had known about and Marco had cleared. What we did not know, whether anyone was coming. The cellular network had collapsed within the first hour. The emergency radio in Eleanor's office was receiving nothing but the same automated FEMA loop that had been playing since midnight, instructing citizens to shelter in place and await further instructions. There had been no further instructions. "We need to assume," Eleanor said, "that no one is coming for at least 72 hours, possibly longer, possibly never." Garrett said, "Then we need to talk about offensive posture." Tomoko, the engineer, said, "We need to talk about structural posture first. This building has 14 identified entry points on the ground floor. The shutters have sealed 11 of them. The other 3 are service entries that were not on the lockdown circuit. 2 of them are currently breached. The third is the loading dock, which Marco welded. I have walked the perimeter of our floor, and we are, for the moment, defensible. But the moment we open any of those entry points to scavenge or escape, we lose the seal." "So we don't open them," Debbie said. "Then we die in here in 3 weeks," Garrett said. "Maybe 4 if Marco's right about the grocery store. We die slowly. We die of dysentery and depression and infection from cuts we can't treat. We die of Mr. Halberstam not having his heart medication. We die of Arav's mother never coming for him, and a 7-year-old finding out what that means We die of the council eventually splitting over 1,000 small decisions, because nobody has the authority to override anyone. Sheltering in place is not a survival plan. It is a delayed sentence. There was a long silence. He was, again, not wrong. This is what I keep telling you about Garrett Hale. He was not a stupid man. He was not even, by his own lights, a cruel man. He was a man who had decided early in his life that clarity was a higher virtue than kindness, and who had spent decades getting very good at making the case for things. "Then what do you propose?" Eleanor said. "A scouting party," Garrett said. 6 people. Tomorrow night, after we've rested and organized. We go up to the 2nd level through the service stairwell. We map the infected population. We identify a route to the rooftop where we can deploy signals fires, mirrors, anything that draws aerial attention. And we identify whether the grocery anchor is accessible. We do not engage. We do not extract anyone. We gather information and we come back. "Who leads it?" I asked. It was the first thing I'd said in the meeting. Garrett looked at me. There was, for the first time, something almost like respect in the look. "I do," he said. Eleanor said, "We'll vote." The vote was 3-2. Tomoko and I voted with Eleanor against the scouting party. Devi voted with Garrett. I had not expected that. I would not understand it until later. The scouting party was approved for the following night. I want to tell you about Devi's vote, because it is the moment in this story when I first understood that I did not understand any of the people around me as well as I thought I did. I caught her alone, an hour after the meeting, while she was repacking the medical supplies on a folding table near the wall where Arav was sleeping under her coat. The boy had finally gone down, the way children sometimes do in the middle of catastrophe, dropping into sleep like a stone, because the alternative was unbearable. "You voted with him," I said. "I did." "Why?" She did not look up. She was sorting gauze packets by size, with a methodical economy of a person who has done this exact motion 10,000 times in her career. "Because Garrett is right that we cannot stay here," she said. "He is right about Mr. Halberstam. He is right about Arav. He is right that a sealed room is a coffin we have not yet noticed we are in. He is wrong about almost everything else, including how to talk to a frightened room. But he's not wrong about the arithmetic of being trapped. And Eleanor is so afraid of him that she is going to refuse every plan he proposes, even the correct ones. Someone on the council has to be willing to vote with him when he is right, or he is going to stop bringing his ideas to the council at all." I had not thought of it that way. I had been thinking of the council as 2 factions and 3 swing votes. Devi was thinking of it as an ecosystem that needed maintenance. "He's going to use the scouting party to consolidate," I said. "He's going to come back from that mission as the man who saved us." "Probably," Devi said. "And if the information he brings back is good, that will be a price worth paying. And if he comes back having done something stupid and gotten people killed, the room will see it, and we will have what we need to remove him." That's a cold way to think. I am a pediatric nurse, Marcus. I have watched children die of cancer for 19 years. I do not have warm thinking left in me for adult men with opinions. She looked up then, and I saw for the first time how tired she was. Not physically tired. The other kind. The kind that accumulates over a career of carrying things that are not yours. "The reason I voted with him," she said, "is not because I trust him. It is because I do not trust any single one of us. And I am trying to keep the council balanced enough that no one person becomes the answer. Including Eleanor. Including you. Including me." I sat with that for a long time after she went back to her sorting. The scouting party left at 9 p.m. the following night, December 21st, through the service stairwell. Garrett picked his team. Devereaux, the ex-cop. 2 of the lifters from Group B, men named Soren and Patel. A woman named Kit who had been a wildland firefighter in Oregon and who had volunteered the moment the mission was announced. And, against my objection in the council meeting, Priscilla, the cashier from the gift kiosk, 22 years old, candy cane pins still on her lanyard. Garrett wanted her because she knew the mall's layout from the retail side. Eleanor had vetoed it. Garrett had taken the vote to the room. The room, by then, was already starting to drift in his direction, and the room had said yes. I watched Priscilla go through the service door with a flashlight strapped to her chest and a fire axe in her hands that she clearly had no idea how to use. I watched Garrett squeeze her shoulder in a way that was meant to look paternal and looked, to me, like ownership. I should have stopped it. I was on the council. I had a voice. I used it in the meeting, and then I let the room overrule me. And I told myself that was democracy. Priscilla did not come back. The scouting party returned at 4:17 a.m. There were 5 of them. Garrett came through the service door first, and the way he came through it told me, before any words were spoken, what had happened. He was not bleeding. None of the survivors were bleeding. But his jacket was torn at the shoulder, and the fire axe in his right hand was no longer clean. And his eyes had the specific glaze of a man who had crossed a line he had been carrying around inside himself for a long time and was now on the other side of. Devereaux came in second, then Soren, then Kit, supporting Patel, whose left ankle was the wrong shape and who was breathing through his teeth. No Priscilla. Eleanor met them at the door. She did not ask. She waited. This is, I've come to believe, one of the most powerful things a person in a leadership position can do, not ask, and let the absence of the question force the report. We lost Priscilla on the second level, Garrett said. His voice was level. Near the food court. There was a swarm at the railing. She was clearing a path with the axe, and one of them came over the planters from a direction none of us were watching. It was fast. There was nothing to be done. Eleanor said, "Did you confirm?" "Confirm what?" "That she was dead before you left her." Garrett looked at her. There was a small flicker in his face, not guilt exactly, but the awareness that he had just been asked a question he had hoped not to be asked in front of witnesses. "There wasn't time," he said. "You left her alive." "I left her overwhelmed. There is a difference." "There is not," Eleanor said. "A difference." Devi was already moving toward Patel with her medical bag. Kit, the firefighter, was the one who spoke next. She did not look at Garrett when she did it. "We could have gone back," she said. She fell behind a planter. The swarm was on her, but the swarm was not yet on the planter. We could have flanked from the Cinnabon side and pulled her out. Garrett called the retreat. I asked him twice. He called the retreat both times. Garrett said, "And we are all standing here because I did." "We are 5 of 6 standing here because you did," Kit said. That is not the same sentence. The room was awake. The room had heard. I watched 200 faces, or perhaps 199, now process the information. I watched the small alliances of the previous day start to recalibrate. I watched a man named Hollis's absence become, retroactively, a different shape in the room's memory. I watched Eleanor Pike not look at Garrett, because she did not need to. The room was looking at him for her. And then Garrett did something I will remember for the rest of my life, because it was the single most effective political move I have ever witnessed a person make in real time. He put the axe down. He sat on an overturned crate. He put his head in his hands. And he said loud enough for the room to hear, "I made the wrong call. I called the retreat too early. I should have flanked. I was afraid for the rest of the team, and I made a decision out of fear, and a young woman is dead because of it. I am sorry. I am asking this room to take that into account when you decide what to do with me." He looked up. His eyes were wet. I could not tell, then or now, whether the tears were real. I am not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me earn it back. The room, which had been about to turn against him, did not turn. The room instead began very quietly to forgive him. I have thought about that performance for a long time. I have thought about whether it was a performance at all, or whether Garrett Hale genuinely felt grief and guilt and was honest about it in the moment, and whether the distinction matters when the effect is identical. I have come to believe that the most dangerous people are not the ones who lie about their feelings. The most dangerous people are the ones who feel exactly what they need to feel at exactly the moment they need to feel it, without the lie ever being conscious. Eleanor called an emergency council meeting in the inventory office. The 5 of us sat at the folding table again. The mood was different this time. Tomoko was angry in a contained way I had not seen from her before. Devi was quiet and exhausted. Eleanor was the same calm she had been for 2 days, but there was something flintier underneath it. And Garrett was, and this is the part I want to underline, composed. He had absorbed the room's near mutiny, converted it into a performance of contrition, and arrived at the meeting with a clean political slate. I move, Eleanor said, to remove Garrett from the council. On what grounds? Garrett said. Not defensive, curious. Loss of confidence. You made an operational decision that resulted in the death of a civilian under your command, and you have not produced a survivor's account that the other survivors corroborate. Kit's testimony is on the record. Kit was scared. Kit was in her first contact with the infected. Kit will, if you ask her in a week, tell you a different version of that night. I am not contesting her account. I am contesting whether her account, alone, is grounds for removal. It is not alone, Tomoko said. You took Priscilla against the council's vote. You used the room to override us. You made a habit in 2 days of converting council decisions into public referendums whenever the council disagreed with you. The vote is not about Priscilla. The vote is about whether you respect the structure of this council. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then let's vote." The vote was 2-2. Eleanor, removal. Tomoko, removal. Garrett, of course, against. Devi, and this is the part I keep returning to, abstained. Which left me. I want to describe this moment precisely, because it is the moment in this story that I've replayed more than any other. And I want you to see it the way I saw it. The 4 of them were looking at me. Eleanor's face was unreadable. Tomoko was leaning forward with her elbows on the table. Devi was looking at her own hands. Garrett was looking directly at me, with an expression I want to call sympathetic, but which I think, in retrospect, was something more like recognition. He was looking at me the way one man looks at another man when he's about to find out whether they are the same kind of man. I thought about Priscilla, the candy cane pin, the $5 tip, the way she had wrapped the snow globe in tissue paper. I thought about the scouting report Garrett had delivered because he delivered one, before the conversation about Priscilla, which had confirmed that the grocery anchor store was accessible, that the rooftop was reachable through a service ladder near the 3rd-floor mechanical room, that the infected on the upper levels were dense but not coordinated, that there was a clear corridor toward the east emergency exit that could, with planning, be opened from inside. I thought about the fact that this information was going to save lives, possibly all of our lives, and that we had it because Garrett Hale had been willing to go up there, and because Priscilla had died. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the snow globe, which was still in a paper bag somewhere on the storage room floor, and which I had not looked at since the lockdown started. I voted to keep Garrett on the council. I want to be very clear about why I voted the way I voted, because I have lied to myself about it in the time since, and I do not want to lie to you. I did not vote to keep Garrett because I thought it was the right call. I voted to keep him because I was afraid. I was afraid of what the room would do if the council removed him without consensus. I was afraid of what he would do, specifically, with the fraction of the room that had already attached itself to him. I was afraid of becoming the man who had cast the deciding vote against him. And the kind of attention that would draw from a person I was beginning to understand was very good at remembering who had crossed him. And I told myself, in the moment, that I was voting for stability, that removing him would fracture the room, that keeping him on the council under closer scrutiny was the more responsible choice, that I was being pragmatic. I was lying to myself. I want that on the record too. Eleanor did not react when I cast my vote. She wrote the result down on her clipboard, and she closed the meeting. And she went out into the storage room to coordinate the day's water distribution. And she did not, for the next 18 hours, speak to me. Not coldly, not with any visible reproach. She simply allocated her attention elsewhere. And I felt the absence of it the way you feel the absence of a light you didn't realize you'd been reading by. Tomoko was less subtle. She passed me near the loading dock door later that morning, and she said without breaking stride, "You will regret that vote, Marcus." She did not stop walking. She did not look at me. She was, I came to understand, not angry at me personally. She was angry at the version of me she had assumed existed, and which had now revealed itself to be a different and lesser version. And she was filing the information for later use. Devi, when I found her, was the one who surprised me. "You did what I expected you to do," she said. "What did you expect?" "I expected you to vote your fear. I expected Eleanor to vote her conscience. I expected Tomoko to vote her engineering brain, which sees Garrett as a structural risk. I expected Garrett to vote his survival. And I expected myself to abstain. Because I'm the only one of us who is not playing the long game of this council. I am playing the short game of keeping the people in this room alive for the next 48 hours. And Garrett's information is more valuable to that game than his presence is dangerous. Yet. She went back to her gauze. The next 48 hours moved fast. Tomoko, using Garrett's scouting intelligence, drew up a plan to reach the rooftop and deploy signals. Eleanor, with Marco, worked out the logistics of a grocery raid, 3 teams of 4, staggered timing, an extraction route through the service corridor we'd come in by. Devi prepared a triage protocol for returning teams, including a quarantine space carved out of a small storage room with a door that locked from the outside. The room, the larger room, the 200 settled into a kind of grim rhythm. People learned each other's names. The 2 Letterman jacket brothers, who turned out to be named Theo and Bennett, started a small school for the 4 children in the room, including Arav. Mr. Halberstam, the man with the oxygen tank, was running low and was, Devi quietly told the council, going to need either heart medication from the pharmacy on the 4th floor or an honest conversation about palliative care. Garrett, throughout these 48 hours, was a model council member. He deferred. He brought ideas to the council instead of the room. He listened more than he spoke. He was, in short, on his best behavior. I should have understood that this meant he was waiting for something. On the 3rd night, December 23rd, the power went out. It did not happen all at once. The fluorescent panels in the storage room flickered first, then dimmed, then settled into a half-strength yellow that suggested the building had switched to emergency backup. Eleanor was on her feet within seconds, conferring with Marco about the generator's fuel capacity. 18 hours, he said. Maybe 24 if we cut non-essential systems. The water pumps would fail first, then the ventilation, then the lighting itself. The room received the news quietly. People had been waiting, I think, for some new disaster. And the arrival of one was almost a relief, at least, until they began to calculate what it meant. Garrett called for a full assembly. Not a council meeting. An assembly of the room. Eleanor said, "We should discuss this on the council first." Garrett said, "Eleanor, the room is going to be dark in 18 hours. The room deserves to hear its options from all of us, together, not from a closed-door meeting after the fact. I am not going around the council. I am asking the council to address the room." It was, again, the right move. It was always the right move when he made it. That was the problem with Garrett Hale. Half of what he did was correct, and half of it was poison. And the two were braided so tightly together that pulling on one risked pulling on the other. Eleanor agreed. The assembly was called. The 5 council members stood at the front of the room on the small platform Marco had built from pallets. The remaining 199 survivors gathered in a loose semicircle. Mr. Halberstam was wheeled to the front. Arav sat on Devi's hip. Theo and Bennett stood with the other children behind Divi. The room smelled, by then, of human bodies, an old cardboard, and the chemical tang of the disinfectant Devi had been rationing. Garrett spoke first, with Eleanor's nod. He laid out the situation cleanly. Power loss in 18 hours. Water pumps failing thereafter. Ventilation, lights. He laid out the 3 options the council had been working on for 2 days. Option 1. Shelter in place. Ration water from the building's tanks. Except that within 72 hours, the room would be operating without lights, water, or air circulation. And hope that rescue arrived before the situation became untenable. Option 2. A coordinated rooftop extraction using Tomoko's route, signaling for aerial rescue with whatever fuel they could spare for fires, and accepting that the rooftop was exposed and that they would be visible to whatever was outside as well as whatever was above. Option 3. A full evacuation through the east emergency exit, which Garrett's scouting party had identified as accessible, with the entire room moving in coordinated groups through the mall's lower level to the parking structure, and from there to the open street. He did not editorialize. He laid out the 3 options, and he sat down. Eleanor spoke next. She presented the council's recommendation, a hybrid of options 1 and 2. Stay in the room. Send a small extraction team to the rooftop to deploy signals. Maintain the secure space as the home base. Reassess in 48 hours. Then Garrett stood up again. "I want to register for the record that I disagreed with the council recommendation. I voted for option 3. I believe that this room is going to die slowly if we stay in it. And I believe that we have a window, a narrow one, but a real one, to move 200 people through the lower level while the infected population is still distributed across the upper floors." I lost that vote on the council, 3-2. I am bringing it to the room because the room deserves to know that the option exists, and because 200 people should not have their lives decided by 5. Eleanor closed her eyes. Just for a second. I saw it. Tomoko saw it. Devi saw it. The room did not see it because the room was already looking at Garrett. He had done it again. The vote in the room was held by show of hands. Eleanor, to her credit, organized it. She could have refused. She could have said that the council's decision stood and that no further vote was warranted. She did not. I have asked myself, in the months since, whether she allowed the vote because she believed in the principle of it, or because she knew she had already lost the room and wanted the loss to be procedural rather than informal. I have come to believe it was both. The vote was 134-65 in favor of option 3. 1 person abstained. That person was me. I want to tell you why. I want to tell you that I abstained because I genuinely could not decide. I want to tell you that I abstained because I had been wrong so many times in the previous 72 hours that I no longer trusted my own judgment. I want to tell you these things, and they would all be partly true. But the more honest thing is that I abstained because I was on the council, and I had voted to keep Garrett on the council. and I could not now vote against the plan he had brought to the room without admitting to myself what my earlier vote had cost. Eleanor stood very still on the platform for a long time after the count was announced. Then she stepped down. She walked over to where Marco was standing with his clipboard, and she said something to him quietly, and he nodded. She came back up onto the platform. "All right," she said. "We move at 2 a.m. Tomoko will draw the evacuation routes. Devi will prepare medical kits for each group. Marco will organize transport for Mr. Halberstam and the children. Garrett will lead the forward team. I will bring up the rear. Marcus," she looked at me for the first time in 2 days, "will coordinate the middle groups. Get some sleep if you can." She had absorbed the loss. She had distributed roles in a way that gave Garrett his victory and kept him at the front, away from the vulnerable, while keeping herself at the rear where she could see everything. She had given me a role that mattered. She had not in any visible way fought for her own preference once the room had spoken. It was, in retrospect, the most generous thing she did. And she did it for a room that had just chosen against her. We moved at 2:14 a.m., 14 minutes late, because Mr. Halberstam's oxygen tank needed to be transferred to a smaller wheeled cart, and there was a brief argument about who would push it. Theo and Bennett, the Letterman brothers, volunteered together. Devi approved them. The room organized itself into 6 groups of roughly 33, each with a designated leader, each with a rough route, each with a small medical kit. I will not describe the next 4 hours in detail. I am not capable of it. What I will tell you is this. We moved through the service corridor, down to the first floor back of house, and from there in a long staggered line through the mall's lower level toward the east emergency exit. The infected were present. They were not as dense as the upper floors, but they were not absent. We lost 12 people in the corridor near the food court. We lost 3 more at the exit itself, when the door was pried open and the noise drew a swarm from the parking structure. Mr. Halberstam died in the corridor, not from infection, from his heart. Theo was holding his hand when it happened. Bennett kept the cart moving. Devi did not have time to confirm the death until we reached the exit, and by then the body had been left behind. And Theo did not speak again until we were 3 blocks from the building. Priscilla's body we did not find. We did not look. The route did not take us through the second level. Of the 200 who had gathered in the storage room, 184 reached the parking structure alive. Garrett Hale was one of them. So was Eleanor Pike. So was I. The parking structure was not safe. Nothing was safe. But it was open, and the cold December air after 3 days of recycled storage room atmosphere was the first thing in 72 hours that felt like it belonged to the world rather than to the building. Tomoko, ahead of the rest of us, had identified a small fleet of vehicles in the structure's lower deck, 3 delivery vans that had been there since the lockdown, a city bus that had been parking for the night, 4 employee cars whose owners were either with us or were not coming back. We had keys for some. We hot-wired the rest. A man named Esperanza Diaz, who'd been quiet for most of 3 days, turned out to have run a chop shop in his 20s and walked through the structure with the patience of a man being asked to do something he was good at. By 7 a.m. on December 24th, we had transportation for 184 people. The question of where to go was not mine to answer. Eleanor and Tomoko worked it out with maps from Marco's office, and what little radio information we'd picked up there was a federal staging area being set up at the regional airport, 40 miles north, and a smaller civilian shelter operating out of a high school in the next county. The convoy split into 2. Eleanor took one half toward the airport. Tomoko took the other half toward the high school. Garrett went with Eleanor. I went with Tomoko. I did not consciously choose. I chose by standing where I stood when the groups divided, and I stood where I stood because Devi was standing there. and Arav was on her hip. And I decided sometime in the previous 24 hours that wherever Devi went was where I was going. Eleanor came over to me before her convoy left. She put a hand on my shoulder briefly. "You were not the worst of us, Marcus," she said. "You were not the best of us either. You were what most rooms are in most disasters. I want you to remember that the next time you are on a council, and I hope, for your sake, that there is a next time." I did not know what to say. I said, "I'm sorry." "I know," she said. "It does not change anything. But I know." She got into the lead van. Garrett got into a van 2 vehicles behind her. The convoys pulled out of the parking structure at 7:42 a.m. on the morning of December 24th. I never saw Eleanor Pike again. I learned 3 weeks later that her convoy was attacked on the highway and that the survivors had been routed to a different shelter, and that Eleanor had been one of those survivors, and that she had then walked back into the field on foot alone, against the advice of everyone around her, to retrieve a younger woman who'd been separated from the group. She did not come back from that walk. The woman she went after did. I have her name written down. I have not written to her yet. Garrett Hale I did see again, once. In a refugee processing camp in March 3 months later, where he was running a logistics tent and where a young woman who was not his wife was leaning on his shoulder while he gave directions to a line of people who needed help. He saw me across the camp. He raised a hand. I did not raise mine back. I do not know whether he understood why. Tomoko's convoy reached the high school shelter by mid-afternoon on the 24th. Devi and Arif, and Theo and Bennett and I, and 104 other people walked through the doors of a converted gymnasium and were given blankets and soup and a phone with 3 minutes of guaranteed connection. I used my 3 minutes to call Cassandra. Lila answered. I did not know what to say. I said her name, and I said I was alive, and I said that I had the snow globe, which was the only true thing I had to offer her, and I said that I loved her. She said it back, and the connection cut. I am writing this from a small apartment in a town I had never heard of before March. Lila visits on weekends. Cassandra and I are not reconciled, but we are no longer hostile. And the snow globe sits on Lila's windowsill in her room here. The ceramic fox curled and untouched by anything that happened. I think about the vote, the one I cast to keep Garrett on the council. I think about it more than I think about Priscilla, which is itself a moral failing I'm still learning to sit with. What I have come to understand is that I did not survive because I made good decisions. I survived because the people around me, Eleanor, Devi, Tomoko, Marco, a man named Esperanza I barely spoke to, were better than the room deserved. I survived because 200 strangers, asked to be a society in 3 days, mostly succeeded, despite the few of us who failed at the smallest required courage. I am not a hero of this story. I am a man who held a snow globe through the end of the world, and who is trying now to be someone his daughter would have voted for. I am still trying.